Okay.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night, wherever you are in the world. I love saying that, particularly today, because we know that we have somebody here from China where it's 11 p.m., whereas it's only 9 a.m. where I am. So today we are looking at another webinar in our webinar series for the International Listening Association. And I'm very excited about that. It's going to be a terrific one. We're looking at education primarily at the elementary level, but I think that a lot of the things that Donna is going to talk about will be able to transfer to the upper K through 12 levels, also the university, and perhaps even the training classroom as well. I'm going to flip over to the PowerPoint here so you can see that the title of our webinar today is Balancing Literacy Instruction, Teaching Listening in the Elementary Classroom. And just a few quick introductions. I'm Laura Janusik. I'm the host and producer here at Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri in the United States. I'm also a consultant. I'm a researcher. I'd like to think that I'm a fun researcher, and I research areas like listening cognitions, listening metacognitions, and pedagogy, which is that fancy word for teaching. I've been an ILA member since 1998 and the president of the association from 2010 to 2011. And now I'm going to hand it over to Phil. As you can see, he is my technological guru. Phil, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I can. Thank you, Laura, and welcome everybody. This is going to be a really intriguing webinar. I know it will be for me as well. I'm an instructor of communication studies here at Northern Virginia Community College, specifically at the Annandale campus, and I've been here going on my 19th year. I am also a Virginia master teacher, and the area of specialty that I like to focus in on is listening and student success. Like Laura, I am also a past president of the International Listening Association from 2015 to 2006.
Terrific, thank you. And let me go ahead and just keep it on you, Phil, for the webinar tips in terms of using this wonderful system.
To make your experience a little bit better, I have gone on and muted all the microphones except those of the participants. When we get to the question and answer session, we'll be able to unmute microphones right there. This is to reduce the ambient noise. If you have a question at any time during the webinar, please use the chat feature. It runs along the bottom of the screen for most screens, and you could see it says chat, and there's sort of like a conversation balloon. And if you do that and type in your message, Laura and I both are monitoring that through the whole thing, and we will share your questions. When it comes time to leave, it's easy for you to sign off. You see the little end meeting in the bottom right-hand corner, and that's all you have to do. So just sit back, formulate your questions, listen, learn, enjoy. We're glad to have you.
Terrific. Thanks, Phil. And I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing our guest today, Donna Folgelsong. Donna actually has her PhD in curriculum and instruction from Virginia Tech. And of course, her specialty area is listening. I was very surprised and also in awe of her dissertation, which I read, and she actually did a presentation on at the conference in Ireland. Just absolutely fascinating. And so today's work actually builds on that as well. She now is a teacher at the elementary education program at Virginia Tech. I should say probably a professor at Virginia Tech because she teaches soon-to-be teachers. She does have experience in the classroom. She previously taught kindergarten, which I consider her to be a saint for that. She also taught first grade. There was absolutely no way that I could be in a classroom with that young of children for the entire day without going crazy. And she's got special areas, including reading recovery and Title I reading teacher. So she knows how children listen or don't listen, which we're going to find out. Her big mantra, which I think is a great Twitter friend headline actually, is don't tell students to listen, teach them how. And that's exactly what we've been saying at all levels. We don't have to tell students to listen. We have to teach them how to listen, because it's one of those human skills that seems to have diminished greatly with technology. You can see that Donna's email is here, and I'm going to encourage everybody to write that down. And the reason I'm encouraging you to write that down is because this PowerPoint will be available by emailing Donna at Donna, D-O-N-N-A, Folgelsong, all one word, F-O-G-E-L-S-O-N-G, at VT, stands for Virginia Tech, .edu. She also has a website, and you can go to the website to see some of her materials. So welcome, Donna.
Thank you very much. I look forward to this opportunity. Thank you for just joining us and participating in learning how one method of maybe teaching listening to your students in the classroom. My big takeaway for you today is for you to really help your students see that listening is something that we as teachers need to model, and that it is teachable, and to give the students the opportunity to practice using that skill just like you would reading or writing in your classroom. Okay, go. So look at this picture. Isn't this how most of our students see us as Charlie Brown's teacher, where we are just wah, 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 because we are talking at them all day? So how can we help them more effectively listen in the classroom? We all want that classroom where everyone is just sitting quietly and listening to us and then talking only when we tell them to. We've all been or heard Charlie Brown's teacher. In my own classroom, I felt like many times after I taught a lesson, I was definitely Charlie Brown's teacher, because I had to redirect the students and give them directions over and over again. So because I had to restate the directions, I never really thought that it was my inability to get them to listen that was causing that problem, until I started really thinking about them. As a teacher in my preparation programs, no one ever taught me that I needed to teach them to listen. The SOLs say that the students will listen to this, the students will listen to that, but it doesn't address how they're going to listen. So,
Donna,
yes.
do you use the term SOL? And
yes, sorry. Standards of learning. Each state in the United States has specific curriculum for their students. And so ours in Virginia is called the Standards of Learning. A lot of states have Common Core, but these are just basically those skills that you have to teach every day to your students. There's first grade, second grade. Each grade level has its own set of specific standards that the students need to learn. And our language arts standards talk about how the students will listen, but it talk about how that's going to happen.
yeah, good point. Good point.
Okay, so when I was in my teacher prep courses, again, we were taught how to teach reading and writing and math and social studies, but no one taught us that could teach listening. It's just an expectation. When students come in the classroom, we expect them to listen because they've been listening for the last 5 years before they came to kindergarten. So what I want them to do is, I want you to think about how can we transition from being a Charlie Brown teacher, and maybe that requires two things. Maybe we need to be more direct and specific and less talking at our students, explicitly telling them what we want them to do, how we want them to listen, but then also giving them the opportunity to practice that in the school setting. Okay, you can go. So if we look at this chart has been the same for the last 70 years. Students spend about 16% of their day in reading instruction, or in reading, not instruction, sorry. this talks about what they do during the school day. So 16% of the time they're reading, 9% they're writing, and then speaking is 30%, whereas they are expected to listen at least 40% of the day. So the overwhelming part of the day, the students are either talking or listening, but those are the skills. Listening is not something we teach. So it's the skill they do the most, but it's the one we don't teach.
That's absolutely correct. And I just want to make a little correction here because I know a couple of people who are on the webinar know this. These stats are actually for the college classroom and not necessarily the elementary classroom, which actually, in talking with Donna, that's an area of study or research that she would love to do. So if we have anyone who is interested in doing a study like that with Donna, please email her so we can get those stats for the K through 12 or just the elementary level, and that would be absolutely terrific. And the other correction is not only is this for the college classroom, they really haven't stayed consistent for the 70 years, as you said. People used to read and write a heck of a lot more than they do today. Actually, I was watching a video yesterday, a TED Talk, and they said that students today do not read a book or a magazine on a daily basis, as about 30% of them do in high school, 12th grade, versus what they used to do 40 years ago. Is probably almost 100% of the students would read a part of a book a day, a part of a magazine a day. So many of these language arts skills are going away, and I think the next future piece of the pie is going to have to include the internet, you know, because they do so much on there.
Absolutely. So do you have a question?
I don't have a question, but I do see that there's a chat that's come in. But Phil, I can't, where does reading their screens figure in? And that was from Sheila Bentley. And Sheila, that's a great question. I can tell you, as somebody doing this type of research, when we did it, we included the internet and the smartphone within these stats. So reading the screen would constitute reading because it didn't matter the format. The listening part was interesting because we were not sure how to distinguish between listening and reading sometimes, particularly with things like instant messaging. But we get way off track. So Donna, let's get back to you and the elementary classroom.
Okay. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So what the core language art skills are reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So what I'm looking to change is to create a more balanced classroom where we spend as much time teaching reading and writing as we do giving children opportunities to practice specifically listening and speaking. So I propose we integrate this more balanced curriculum. How do we do this? How can we balance the curriculum in classroom so that we can include more listening instruction? We've taught we can do this by including these skills across the school day. We can embed them into different curriculum. Once we've given them the opportunity to learn how to do this, we've taught them specifically that they have to be able to we've given them the main objectives. We've given them the tools, just like we give them the tools for reading and writing. They have a base. They are able to decode and understand how to listen, and then we give them the practice this. This type of instruction is going to require some more planning, but it's require explicit teaching and modeling by the classroom teacher. It requires us to model the skill, and it can start with language arts because listening is one of the core language arts skills. But it is really easily integrated if you embed it in read aloud instruction because that's something that most teachers do every single day. We're ready. Okay, go. All right, so we have to talk about this gap. Listening is the first literacy skill that students learn. They learn to listen through being part of the conversation at home, part of the environment. They learn to listen by just mimicking their parents. And their siblings. They're immersed in the noise of home life. It just becomes a conversation that's ongoing. But listening at home is different from school because they're not expected to sit still for long periods of time or to listen to lots of people, you know, to listen with lots of people and distractions around them. So we have to teach them how to do that. School requires a different set of listening skills for our students. They have to learn to wait their turn, talk to your partner. They have to know how to do that. They have to sit and listen to the teacher while she gives directions. And then there's someone next to you that's probably poking you. So it's really hard with these distractions for students to learn how to listen because they really haven't taught how to be school listeners. They're more of the environment of home listening. So unfortunately, again, I'm going to bring up the fact that, you know, pre-service programs do not teach students that listening is a skill that can be taught. It's just assumed that they already know how to listen. So we need to be aware of our own listening habits in the classroom. Are we modeling what we want our children to do? When we tell them to listen, are we modeling the same thing for them? When we ask them to listen, do we share that responsibility and listen to them when they talk to us? But thinking about how we want them to listen, and then we need to model that for them as well. So the big question is, again, how do we bridge this gap? I think we have to begin with the teachers. Listening is a literacy skill, just like reading or writing, that needs to be practiced. Students have to have practice with it, and it has to be authentic. We're going to have to teach it. But again, I think that it can be done throughout the school day without a lot of adjustment to your regular classroom practices.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you said, Donna, that was really interesting was distinguishing between home listening and classroom listening, because they are extremely different skills. So even though a child learns to listen at home, and notice I'm not using the word effectively,
right,
because they learn to listen differently depending on if there's one child at home or 5 children at home, or if they go to daycare, or if they even have an adult around who wants to hear what they have to say. So there are so many other contextual factors that go into how a children learns to home listen. Yes. And then, as you said, we do expect them to transition seamlessly on the first day of class into the classroom listening, but it certainly does not work that way.
Exactly. All right, so let's talk about some steps for beginning listening instruction. I am going to talk to you about 3 different ones. I'm going to give you a sneak peek about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about this wonderful book called Whole Body Listening, Larry at School. And this is we're going to talk about what whole body listening is. And then we're going to talk about a strategy created by Funk and Funk in 1989, which I've adapted a little bit. So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk about how to use dyads to practice these strategies. I can help you become more aware of how you can teach your students to listen by giving them opportunities to actually learn to listen to each other so they can listen to learn. All right, so let's talk about whole body listening. How many of you have heard of whole body listening?
So we want people to go to the chat feature on this one and just say, yes, I've learned about whole body. You can just say yes, that's much easier to type. Yes or no, have you heard about whole body listening? I was not aware of this until Donna taught me about it this summer, and I have been fascinated by it since. Terry says, I've heard the term before. I would expect that one. Samantha says yes. Sheila says yes, but I haven't heard it called that. Terry Smith says probably from Donna.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm surprised actually at the number of people who have heard about it. Dr. H says, I have taught the idea for years, but not the term. Samantha says from Donna. SCG in China says, I never heard it before. So we have a mixed crowd here, the majority having heard it. That appears to be the majority knowing you, Donna. Right. But people who don't know you don't seem to know about the term. So go ahead and explain it to us.
It is a term that has been around forever. The authors of the book, Whole Body Listening, Larry, explored how they're both speech pathologists. So they wanted to create some type of more specific listening practice for their students. So they wrote this story about whole body listening, Larry, and where these 2 brothers and sisters struggle to focus their brains and bodies while they're in the school environment. And there's a peer mentor that helps them explain how they need to use their eyes, their hands, their feet, their brain, their heart to be able to listen in this group environment, to not only access the information, but also to be parts of the group. So they created this wonderful tool that I did use with the teachers that I worked when I was working on my research study. But it is a really good way to make students more aware about what it is they need to be doing and how they can listen more effectively. We're helping students to become more self-aware of what they're doing. But when you set those expectations, the students then can meet those expectations if you give them the opportunity to say, this is how we're going to listen. And they practice using their eyes and their ears. Because a lot of times, you know, even though you have students in your classroom that may not appear to be listening, they may be wiggling, they may be moving around, those may be the best listeners that you have in the classroom. So if you make them more aware of what the good listening you expect to see is, you may not have to call them out as much, because you're going to know that, oh, they're going to have trouble listening with their feet. But if we set these expectations at the beginning of this activity, then they're going to be more likely to be more quiet with their feet and quiet with their hands and their mouth.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point that you bring up. I remember Charles Roberts once taught me about the wiggle factor. I can't remember if that's exactly what he called it, but they did a study, and I've never been able to track it down. It was college freshmen, and they put a sensor on the seat that the students sat in. Right. And there was a lecture that was given, and then after the lecture, they gave a test over the content that was lectured on, and then they correlated how much movement a student had versus how much a student remembered. And they found that those who moved more had a significant better recall of the information than those that have moved less. And I know that I have seen studies like that with children as well. Can you talk at all about those?
There have been some studies with children, and and you know, in my own practice too, I've seen, you know, those students that appear to not be listening might be the ones who can, you know, you're like, oh, they're not listening, and you call on them, and they know everything that you're hearing. So some of the research studies that I have read have talked about how important it is to know your children. You know their style of how they learn. And a lot of that depends on their ability. You know, I see Juliana ask the question, how long can a child listen? Most children, you know, in the primary grades, they can only listen, you know, in kindergarten, you're like 2 to 3 minutes is all you can get them to hear. We also are the ones that are moving. Yes, they are the ones that are listening the best, Samantha, sometimes. Most children in the primary grades can't listen for more than 5 minutes. I mean, they can't sit for more than 5 or 10 minutes because they need to be moving. And they need to be actively engaged in the learning. They're not passive. They're not vessels that you can just pour all this stuff in when they're that young. They have to be engaged in what is going on. So it has to be an active classroom, an environment where they can talk about what they're learning. Because if they don't get a chance to talk about it, it's, you know, there are studies that show things that 50% of what we hear is gone by the next day. So, you know, you have to be very careful with how you create that environment. But if you set the expectation for students to listen and you give them that practice and they are using their whole body, your chances have greatly improved of getting them to know, because not only will they have listened to what you said, but they're also getting a chance to share that with someone else. And one of the things that I tell my pre-service teachers is that if you teach something and you have this other child tell this other person what it is, if they can restate it and rephrase it in their own words, they really do know it. They understand it. And giving them the chance to talk about it is going to help improve their memory of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Terry just added that they do some, I guess, an activity of walking around and listening. And somehow this movement or this being haptic is, for some reason, it gets into our long-term memory more so than if we're just sitting still.
Right, right.
And we also have, Dr. H says, as I look at this more closely, I see my approach was much different from this. I like movement. I even let them eat in class. So Dr. H, we're going to be interested in hearing what your approach is. We're going to be going to questions in a few minutes, so please let us know what your approach is at that point.
Well, and see, I totally agree with Dr. H, because even when you are having them listening, you need to have them engaged in it. So when we talk about the dyads, we'll explain more about that, where they're actually actively a part of this program. So let's go to the purpose. So part of this strategy that Funk and Flunk did, who are also speech teachers, and reading literacy teachers, in 1989, they created this triangle of what they feel like students would be a good way for students to learn to listen. And the first thing that they decided, based on their research, was students, we needed to set a purpose for listening. And I feel like this is the most important thing, because a lot of times when we do read alouds in the classroom, we do have children make predictions. We tell them what we want them to listen to, but not necessarily what we want them to listen for. So when we set the purpose, this allows the teacher to think about what it is we want them to listen for. Is it the main idea? Is it a character? Is it to make inferences? What is it we want them to do? So this can also help teachers make connections and check informally whether the children are comprehending. What is their listening comprehension for this activity? When we implement the listening instruction into the read alouds, we can give the students a purpose for listening. For example, if we were reading Charlotte's Web, we might say, okay, boys and girls, when we listen to this chapter, I want you to listen for the part where it talks about we need to be able to figure out what she does with Wilbur all day while she's at school. How can she take care of him if she's in school all day? Or figuring out some question that they're going to listen for while you're reading the story.
Donna, can I ask a question? You
Sure.
distinguished, actually, in your speaking, the difference, or you distinguished that there appeared to be a difference between listening to and listening for. And
Right.
could you help me understand that a little bit better?
So we tell the children, I want you to listen to this story while I read it. And that's a lot of times what, okay, let's listen to this story. And so we're listening to it, right? But now we're giving them a specific a purpose. I don't want you to just listen to the story. I want you to listen to it, but I want you to listen for a reason. I want to give you a specific idea to think about while you're listening to this story. How is this gonna, what is happening in this story? And so
it's very similar then.
Yes.
It sounds metacognitive to me, but it's
Right.
also very similar to the idea that I want you to predict what you're going to hear in this lecture today.
Right.
As example for the upper levels. Okay.
Right. And so it takes it, it's just that basic recall, I guess, would be a good way of saying that. So we're going to give the children something to listen for. And this is something that most teachers, they tell them to listen to, but don't really tell them what to listen for. Students make predictions about books all the time, and that's good. But a lot of times when we make these predictions, we don't revisit those at the end of the story. So if you're going to make predictions at the beginning and let them be part of that conversation, that's awesome. As long as you make sure that you give them the opportunity to revisit that at the very end. Because a lot of teachers finish the story and close the book and then they're done. Well, then what was the purpose of them listening if you didn't revisit to check their predictions? So it's not like what we're doing is wrong, it's just taking it to the next level.
Okay, and we've got a couple of other comments that just came in on this one. Terry says, sounds like it puts the brain on alert if we can keep their attention. Dr. H says, much like AQ3R, or I think I learned that as SQ3R, in
Yes.
how you study as you read instruction. Oh yes, SQ3R. And then at a higher level of interest, it's part of wanting to listen, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Which
and
is
the other thing that I was thinking, Donna, is giving them something to listen for is almost similar to the idea of why they go to the internet to look things up, right?
Mhm.
We want the answer, and
Right.
so when we type in our question, we scan for what is going to answer our question,
Right.
and kind of ignore all of the other stuff. So it's very consistent with the way that they search for information and take in information.
Absolutely. And the you know, this purpose that you're giving them is just that motivating hook to get them into the story, and then to give you some closure at the end. But during the whole process of reading the story, we're going to talk about the other steps, because that's where they're going to actually get to practice listening. So you can go to the next if you like. Okay, so this is the purpose. This is what we just talked about. Sorry, I think I should have slid to the next one.
No
But
problem.
the teacher's role is to be very purposeful about why they're listening. And then after we do that, then we're going to prepare the students for listening. So this is where we're going to set that stage for them. This is where we're going to help them develop those habits. We're going to talk about how to use whole body listening to help you be more aware and cognitive of what you're doing. This holistic thing about your whole body being on alert for just listening. Talking about how we can minimize the distraction in the classroom and give them the opportunity to be aware, self-aware, as well as yourself being, the teacher being self-aware about how we need to listen based on the purpose that we have just had. So it's like, it kind of sounds a little backwards, but you've given them the purpose and now you're going to prepare them. And it's okay, because now they have their motivation to listen, and you can prepare them by giving them the opportunity to tell you what their job is. What do they have to do when they're listening? So then by verbalizing what they have to do, it becomes more internalized and they're more aware of what they need to do. So you can also be a good model for them at this point. So once you've prepared them to listen, then you can, and they've had that chance. So your role again is giving them the clear expectations, reminding them and revisiting whole body listening, and then they get to practice it a little bit, and they're going to paraphrase. Okay, when I'm doing my whole body listening, I am doing this, this, and this. I'm listening with my heart, with my head, and they're telling that to each other to just give themselves a little bit of practice. And then we're ready for the next part where they're actually going to get to practice. And this is where we're going to introduce the dyads. The dyads is just two students talking to each other, having a conversation. So you can label them. This works really well if they're sitting on the floor, so they're close to a partner. You have student 1 and student 2. And we do some of this stuff with Kagan. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But student 1 is going to be the listener. Student 2 is going to be the speaker. You decide. But they're both going to get a chance to reverse roles. When you first introduce dyads, it's a really good idea if you model it with another student so they can see how it works. So you pose a question like, oh, my favorite ice cream is what type of ice cream? And then you're going to practice with this student, and then you're going to show them what whole body listening looks like. And then you're going to say switch, and then the other person's going to get a chance to tell you their favorite ice cream, and you're going to model what whole body listening looks like. So they get a chance to see it, so it's an example for them. A lot of times you can use non-examples as well, because if you do non-examples, I would suggest doing them first. So the last one in their brain is the example, the good example, rather than the non-example. But with little kids, non-examples work really good because that makes a huge impact on them. So giving them that model to see what it should look like, and now you're going to give them the opportunity to practice. So now you're going to start reading your story after you've reminded them what their purpose is, how they're going to prepare. Now you're ready to actually give them the opportunity to practice. So you start reading the book. Depending on, if it's a chapter book or a children's literature, children's picture book, either way, you're just going to read a few pages and then stop and say, this made me think of this. Boys and girls, let's practice our listening, our whole body listening. Such and such, all right, ones, you're going to answer, you're going to tell twos what you think about this, and then giving them the opportunity to practice it. So for example, if we back to the Charlotte's Web story, oh my gosh, I wonder how Fern feels when she's feeding Wilbur that bottle. Okay, ones, tell twos what you think. All right, and then you're going to get the chance to informally assess, monitor by listening in to the conversation that they're having. Okay, do they get it? Are they talking? Oh, are they interrupting? What do we still need to practice? And then after like 30 seconds, you can say, okay, boys and girls, let's switch. Twos, now you tell ones what you think about how Fern feels. So you're giving them that chance to practice. One of the things when I was doing my study is the teachers were really concerned about stopping so many times during the story. And I understand that because teaching read alouds are done for specific purposes, a lot of times for characters or making inferences or main idea. But when you're first starting teaching listening instruction and giving them that opportunity to practice, that's the part that's most important. After you give them the opportunity to practice, it's not so much about the comprehension at this point, it's more about the actual practice. So as you get more, as the students get more developed, their listening skills more developed and create more stamina for listening, then you can worry about the read aloud can be used to practice listening and do comprehension and do main idea. But in the beginning, it needs to be like a reading group. This listening opportunity needs to give them authentic practice with just practicing listening. It's not so much about, wow, did they really get the main idea? It's more about, wow, look how well they did listen to each other and they did have conversations. So when you're listening in to monitor, you're seeing if they're really practicing those listening skills effectively, if they are waiting their turn, if they are really paying attention to the person that is talking. And it's short periods of time. So as you build up the more practice, you start with like 30 seconds. You can give them longer amounts of time as you go through, 3 weeks into practicing this. Their stamina should be built up to where they longer to each other.
So it's interesting, Donna, because what I hear you saying, and when I think back to the whole body listening, what I recognized the first time that I saw the model was that there isn't really a lot of explanation of what goes on cognitively in the whole body listening model. However, what you're suggesting is that there's a scaffolding effect that takes place. So in the beginning, what you're actually teaching are conversational rules, and conversational norms, and we should probably say that these would be norms that would be found in North America. And, so things like eye contact may not be consistent in other countries. So they would need to develop their own whole body listening model that looks a little bit different than ours looks. So you're really teaching the conversational rules and the behaviors of listening before you're worried about the listening cognitions on a higher level.
Yes.
And
Listening.
I'm sorry, you also use the term non-example. And just to be clear, a non-example is what not to do. Is that
right?
Okay.
Yes.
I'd never heard that before.
Yes. Elementary students love non-examples because that's when the teacher's doing something that they know they're not supposed to do. And it's really fun for them because they remember it. But again, press non-examples first and then the good example last.
Okay.
All right, so the roles in the practice are you as a teacher, you're going to ask the questions, you're going to read, you're going to ask the questions and give the students the opportunity to practice and monitor while they're doing that. And the student's only role really is to practice listening to each other by using the dyads. Whether they get, the comprehension piece is going to come, but just giving them that authentic practice with just listening to each other. One of the interesting things in the study that I did was at the end of the study, the students were coming up to the teachers and saying, excuse me, but you're not listening to me because you're not using your whole body listening skills. Or they'd come from home and they would say, my dad did not listen to me last night. He just watched that football game the whole time I was talking to him. He never looked at me once. So they become more aware of what good listening should look like.
Good.
This slide, if you, on my webpage, there's a list of listening books that I used with my, with students. And I need to actually add some more to this, but these are some of my favorites. Whole Body Listening. Larry, I told you about that one. It's about using the whole body listening skills. There's another one called Liam Labradoodle Whole Body Listening, which is also fun. Howard B. Wigglebottom and Listen Buddy are both really good ones for the students because most rabbits, you see they have these huge ears, so you would automatically think that they're great listeners, but unfortunately, neither one of them are. I Have a Little Problem, Said the Bear is one that is an excellent way to get students motivated because your purpose is, oh, boys and girls, look at this cover. What do you think this poor little bear's problem is? And most of the younger children will say, oh, he's just way too big to fit in that tiny little town. So as you're reading the story, when you get through it, halfway through, they're like, oh, wait, it's not that he can't fit in the town. It's that nobody will listen to him. They keep interrupting him and they tell him what his problem is and no one will listen. So using books when you first start teaching listening skills that are about listening is really helpful, because they see other characters that have the same problems that they might have. And so they see the resolution at the end of what needs to happen for them to be better listeners. So it's a good model for students. Okay, go. Yes. Let's talk about, we talked about how we can do this in content areas. So I mentioned briefly earlier about cooperative learning. You can use cooperative learning is all about students working together and talking to each other, coming to the end of each other. So for example, if you wanted to take this into other content areas and beyond just a read aloud in language arts, you would use, you can go to this, literature circles. Literature circles are a way to use, this is where small groups of students are given defined roles about a reading activity that they're going to do. And so you might have the summarizer, you might have the word finder. So students have to work together to create different parts of this story, find different elements of the story, and then they have to work together to share that information. That requires a conversation where they have to talk and listen to each other. So if you've used these read-alouds to help them practice those skills, when they do these literature circles, it's going to be more beneficial for them and they're going to get more out of it. The next area that you might want to do is like a jigsaw in social studies. The jigsaw is, let's see, I'm trying to figure, let me find this. Okay. The jigsaw area is, it's a cooperative learning strategy as well that enables students to work with each other. So for example, you might have the topic in economics like producers and consumers and buyers and sellers. So you would have students meet with other groups who are assigned the same aspects. So you would have like students at one table. You could have each student say, okay, all of you are going to go learn at this group about producers. All of you are going to learn about consumers. All of you about buyers and sellers. And they go do that. And then they go become masters in that topic. And then each person would come back to their home table, and the one person would share with everyone what producers are, one person would share about consumers, one person would share about buyers, one person about sellers, and that way they all became masters, but now they all get to share that information together. So it's not you standing up there and talking at them the whole time, they're actively engaged in their own learning, but they have to speak and listen to each other, not only in their home group, but when they're learning with each other about others.
You know what, Donna? I see that we've got 3 chat comments. But before we go on, let's go ahead and see what people are saying.
Okay.
So, Dr. H says, oh no, we already had Dr. H there. We had Terry, we had the SQ3R. ZSG says nice picture books. Terry says, with the interjection thoughts during reading by the teacher, do you have any guidelines for avoiding fragmenting the story understanding for the kids, or is that not an issue? And
it was definitely a big issue.
That's a big issue. So we'll come back to that. And then Phil says, I just used the jigsaw the other day when we were discussing perception at the college level. So that's interesting. But yes. Do you want to address Terry's question?
Yeah. So in the beginning, that was one of the teachers' big takeaways from the study is they're like, hey, this listening stuff, when we're doing these read aloud practice, they really didn't get the main idea. And the story is they're losing comprehension by stopping so many times. But that's okay. In the beginning, you're going to stop a lot to give them practice with the listening skills. But after you've done it for a couple of weeks, then you're going to back off how many times you stop and practice. So at some point, choose books that are just about listening when you're doing this part, and then let them, when they've gotten more stamina, built up more stamina, and are more fluid with what your expectations are for them for listening, then you can start using it for more for read alouds that you don't want to fragment, that you can give them sustained periods of time where they're going to listen before you have them stop and practice. It's a good question, Terry, because that was a huge issue for the teachers, because I can't do this because there's too many questions. In the beginning, you want a lot of questions because the goal is to give them lots of practice. But after you've been doing it for a while, you're going to back up back off of some of that practice, because hopefully they have improved enough where they built up stamina so they can listen more and they will understand and the comprehension won't be lost. Does that help, Terry? Okay.
I think it does.
Okay, cool. So, and now we can talk about the math. How many of you have heard of Give One, Get One? This is one of my favorite things, where students write, you give them a topic. For example, you might give them even numbers and odd numbers, and students get like a T-chart, and they're going to write down 3 or 4 numbers that they know. And then you're going to have them get up, and they're going to move around the room, and you're going to say, okay, when I say stop, you're going to stop and find a partner, and you're going to give them one of yours, and they're going to give you one of their answers, so that you're getting lots of answers, but you don't have to think of them all yourself. So you're looking to see how that works, but they're also getting the chance when they get up and move around to talk to each other and to listen to each other, because they have to give that. It gives them that practice of moving around and practicing talking to each other, listening, but they're also learning the math content as well.
I love this idea, Donna, and I'm thinking I would be able to use this at the college level so
Absolutely.
Easily. Yeah.
I do this with my pre-service teachers all the time. Terry and I used to do it all the time. They would have to give one and get one.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a good strategy for them. And the next one is numbered heads, which Terry's favorite one is numbered heads. So at the table, your group, you're going to number each student 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's very similar to the jigsaw. You have a question for them, like, for example, what do you know about different types of clouds? And all the students are going to write down what they know about it, and then they're going to get up and they're going to get into a small group and put their heads together, and they're going to have to talk to each other about what it is they all wrote. And then they have to come to a concise definition about what they do know about that cloud. And then you're going to go back and ask them to share out. So again, they're going to get to practice listening. They individually work, but then they get to practice listening with their group, and then they get to talk again and share out with each other. So it's all of these can actually, the jigsaw, the give one, the get one, and the numbered heads are all cooperative learning strategies, and there's a link at the end of this PowerPoint, but they can be used with any content area. So I just specifically attributed each one to a specific content so that you could see how they could be used and how the students would be able to authentically practice their listening skills in different content areas. So it can be done. Just being aware that it can be done and being aware of how to do it is that first step.
Cool. And for the participants today who would like to get that link without waiting to email you for your PowerPoint, Terry has kindly put the numbered head example URL on the chat feature, so you can just copy it there and paste it, and you've got it right away.
Exactly.
Thanks, Terry.
Yes, yes, yes. So every good conversation, as you can see, I love Charlie Brown, as every good conversation requires one person to talk while the other person listens. And we have to help children with this skill. We have to help them because they will become not only better listeners in school, but this will transition into their college life and to their adult life. Because, you know, I think Woven did a study where there's millions of dollars spent every year by big businesses teaching students to listen, because in the 18 years that they had, or in the, if they went to college, but in their 12 years, no one ever taught them how to listen. So it's a big industry where teachers are, that teachers are not addressing, because it has to be addressed after students are adults.
So now we get to move on to questions.
Yes.
This is terrific because Jenny Grau says, I use give one, get one with adults all the time. If you ask folks to change partners after specific times, for example, at the chime, you can prime them to get ready to listen with each new pairing.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I can definitely see using these.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Donna, I don't recall, I apologize. Is this the end of the first part and then we take a break and go and come for questions? Or do we have more content right now?
I think there's one more slide that just is kind of like a summary of everything.
Okay, let's do that summary, and then just so everyone knows, we generally take about a 5-minute break, and then we come back and our technological guru, Phil, will unmute everyone so we can ask questions and have conversations and give great ideas. I'm loving these cooperative learning strategies, and I would love to learn more of them that I could use in the college classroom as well.
Cool. All right, so just to summarize things, there was a study done in 1982 that found that classroom emphasis on language modes was inversely related to how they're taught or how people use them. Students get 12 years of formal training in writing, 6 to 8 years in reading, 1 to 2 years in speaking, and guess how many in listening?
0.
Yes. So this, I believe that teaching listening is going to help promote a more balanced approach to literacy instruction. I feel like we need to do it. The time is now. It's been talked about by different researchers for almost 100 years, or over 100 years, actually. The side benefit of this is that classroom management piece, because if students are more aware of what we expect from them, then you can be more confident when you remind them of those expectations if you've taught them to listen to your directions. But there's a big caution I have with the classroom management piece, because classroom management and listening require 2 different sets of expectations. Classroom management is something that you're going to teach your students how to do, just like you're going to model for them, and you're going to set those expectations, and you're going to remind them, and this is going to require lots of practice for them. But becoming a better listener requires you to specifically plan how you're going to teach this, how you're going to reinforce their behavior. Classroom management requires good listeners. So if we can teach our students to be better listeners, then maybe we can move away from being Charlie Brown teacher, or effective classroom teacher. But we have to model it as well. Whole body listening is something that you can use, but not rely on it. There's anchor charts that you can get that you can have students create, but they should be used, they're posters. But they should be used like anchor charts, not as a poster. You should revisit them just like you would if you were teaching short vowels or whatever content you would. Use those as a tool, not as just something for students to be reminded of.
Okay, Donna, you had more terminology for me here that I'm not familiar with. Anchor chart.
Anchor charts are things that we make. For example, if you are teaching text structures, you might create an anchor chart that has cause and effect, description or whatever, and then you might define it, and then you might have examples of it, and you would create this on a big poster and hang it on the wall for the students to refer to as there are, oh, I'm not sure, I can't remember which one was cause and effect, which graphic organizer. So then they can look at this little chart on the wall. It's kind of like a little chart with ABCs on it that when you're in kindergarten, but it moves up as you transition to different ages. So it's just a teaching tool to help students remember as what they're doing. A lot of times when we teach content, for example, if I was teaching if I was in first grade, if I was teaching mammals, then we would make an anchor chart that said mammals at the top, and the students would help me make a list of all the things that we knew about mammals, and then we would just leave it up the whole time we were learning about mammals.
Okay, thank you. And you just got your first compliment from JSIE Bach, who says, "This has been fantastic. Unfortunately, I have to go pick up my students for the school day. I'll be contacting you, Donna, for a copy of your PowerPoint, and we'll listen to the rest of the presentation via the web address." So that is terrific.
Tell them they also have a whole body listening Larry book at home.
You do?
No, there's two versions.
Oh.
One at home and one is at school.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got 55 minutes past the hour. So let's go ahead and take about a 5 or 7 minute break. And Phil, you can stop recording now. We're about teaching listening at the elementary level with a lot of application to upper levels as well. So let's open it up for questions and answers and discussions. Terry, I know you were just talking, so you can continue talking.
We were talking about to have good listeners, we have to have something worth listening to, and then the various techniques and guidelines Donna was talking about, how you ensure you do that. And the last thing Donna was talking was, I think she was saying, providing choice for your whole classroom and different areas to keep their interest. If you want to say some more about that, Donna?
Well, for example, Terry's question was, how do you keep them interested? And the goal would be, it's really hard because they're all, you have 20 children who are all different in some, or who are all interested. in something else. So it's, you know, finding something that they all like and starting with that, maybe giving them a chance to vote on, hey, tomorrow I want to read this book or this book. Which one do you guys want to choose? Let's vote. Okay, well, we'll read this one tomorrow, but hey, the next day we're going to read your other one. So letting them be part of that conversation so that they are motivated. Hey, my book's not today, but it's going to be tomorrow, so I'm going to listen today. So, you know, it's just giving them chances to do that, and then finding out what they're interested in. You know, a lot of times we did a student of the week when I was teaching, and that person got to choose what book we read on Friday. So it makes them feel special. And then the other kids want to know, they want to listen because they want to know why this kid chose this book. So there's lots of different little ways to engage them and to motivate them. It takes a lot of practice, and it also takes a strong sense of knowing your children, knowing that classroom that you have that year, because they change from year to year.
Donna, one more thing on your idea. Sometimes you hear teachers, they're getting ready to teach something, and they'll say, oh, I know social studies is boring, but we're going to have to get through this. We're going to do it. Isn't that like really just shooting yourself in both feet?
Absolutely. So that's what
fairly common. Yeah.
We call that's one of the things we call like trigger phrases. So you've just triggered them to turn off their listening because you've made it uninteresting to them. A lot of times, I had a service teacher one time who was teaching a wonderful lesson on graph, and the students were going to use candy. She started the lesson by saying, okay, boys and girls, today we're going to use candy to make graphs. So which part did they hear? Candy. They heard nothing about the graph part that they were going to do. They were just like, what kind of candy are we going to use? So it's not that what she said was wrong. It's the order that she used. Today we're going to make graphs. We're going to make pie graphs, which are who can tell me what this is. We're going to make graphs. Who can tell me what that is? Oh, guess what? We're going to use candy to do it. So then you're switching what you say to not use those trigger phrases to actually just turn off their listening, because you don't want to turn it off. So when you say, oh, this is such a boring thing, but we've got to do it, you've turned off their excitement. They don't want to do it. So it's like, oh, boys and girls, today we're going to do this. I tell my pre-service teachers who are all elementary, your job when you go into that building is, it doesn't matter how you feel, you're on the stage. You're an actress or an actor, and all day long you're on. So yes, you're going to be exhausted, but they're going to build on your enthusiasm. If you're not excited about it, they're not going to be excited about it either. Yeah. So using those correct, thinking about how you say it before you say it.
Donna, we actually have 2 questions, but before we go to the questions that are written, Jenny Grau actually has an idea about how to build the interest. And I know that Jenny works with adults. I'm sure that what she has to say is going to translate for both adults and children. Jenny, where are you?
Thanks, Laura. I also have a child with ADHD and a child on the autism spectrum, and so some of the things I do with adults come from my experience with my kids. And one of the things that touches on Laura's metacognitive work and connects to this idea of how do you cultivate interest in a diverse, broad group of people has been for me to prime people by saying, I'd like you to listen to this and find something that is surprising to you, right? So it's unique to that person, but it's also broad enough that everyone can sort of buy into it. It's not strategy, Laura, in the way that you talk about strategy per se, but it gives them a purpose for their listening that is an intent. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I'll sometimes do with folks, especially groups of adults, is I'll bring lots of different photographs into the room of all kinds of weird stuff. Sometimes people, sometimes objects, sometimes places. And I'll bring enough of them that there's a great deal of choice in the room. And I'll just ask people with no direction to walk through the room as if it were a gallery and just pick out 2 things, any 2 things. And then I'll have them take their 2 things and spend some time thinking about how is A like B. And they build the connection, the story, the whatever it is that they're inventing. And I do that as a way to then say, okay, we're now going to do this listening thing. I'd like you to think about something that's important to you or matters to you or has been on your mind of late. Now we're going to do this listening thing, which is actually them listening to another person. And as you are listening to them, I'd like you to think about how this thing is somehow related to your thing. And an initial step to say we relate to our vantage point. I then extend that to say, well, how does this relate now to something in their world that maybe is not your primary reference point?
I love that idea. It's brilliant. I'm sorry, I think you were continuing to talk, but let me just say it's brilliant.
I was done, Laura.
Oh, well, and the thing that is such a great idea, because that is something that I do with my pre-service teachers using primary documents. So we'll documents from the past and we'll have them all spread out on tables, and they have to choose a few, and then they have to go back and see what connections they make to each other. And usually I'll choose the same time period, or it might be one of the things I did one time was show the evolution, the different pictures of the evolution of a sewing machine. And I didn't show them the ones that actually would show what it was, or the ones that they might recognize. I showed them ones first that they didn't recognize. So doing, primary documents is a great way to include that listening practice in social studies, and those things. It's such a great idea. And it's very powerful, because they have to come up with their ideas. They have to listen to each other and make those connections. So yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay, Donna from China, I believe it is. We've got the question, how do you evaluate the results of listening for kids?
That's a tough question. That's why we still don't include it in our curriculum, because there's no way to truly, no one has come up yet with a way of really truly assessing listening. Because either they're assessing students' ability to follow directions, or they may be assessing their comprehension, which could be listening but not directly related. So I think the best bet for right now, until we do more research, is your ability to evaluate the students is just listening into those conversations when they're practicing the dyads or when they're doing the Kagan activities, is just listen and see if they're understanding the goal or the content or the main idea of what you want them to get from that lesson. And that's probably the hardest question to answer right now.
I would think also that whole body listening lends itself pretty well to a rubric at the elementary stage.
Yes.
Were your feet planted on the ground? Were you
Right.
establishing eye contact?
Right.
So there could be a rubric that could be developed at that level.
Yes.
There's another question here from Juliana. And I believe she is in South America. She says, thanks, very interesting. My question is how to ensure that teachers are prepared to carry out these strategies. What is the necessary training for a teacher?
Right now, what I'm doing is trying to raise awareness with teachers that I work with. I work with pre-service teachers, so they have field placements. So with the cooperating teachers that they have, I do activities with them. I'll go in and listening book, let them observe me doing it. But my pre-service teachers, I actually work with them to give them opportunities to practice listening. We do a thing in the spring where they do a lesson study where they all jointly, 3 of them work together to create a lesson that would be able to be taught at kindergarten, 1st or 2nd grade level. This activity allows them to work collaboratively to plan so that they learn how to do that. But the lesson has to be on listening, teaching listening to their students. So giving them that chance to practice it and then figure, okay, how do I use this? What can I do? There needs to be lots more training for pre-service teachers. So webinars like this are going to help raise that awareness. More research is what we're going to do. But I would suggest, even if you don't have the training, go practice using the dyads. Practice just doing it with them. You're not going to lose anything by practicing it. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And as we were on break, I was thinking, how excited I got when you taught me some of those cooperative learning strategies.
Right.
And I think that we could also call those cooperative listening strategies too, right?
Absolutely.
Where we focus on the listening of it, which I love.
Yes.
Sheila's got a question here, and Sheila says, do you include something in your curriculum on why listening is important? Why do we need to listen to other people, especially live in the same room?
I haven't done a lot of research about why we need to listen to people, especially in the same room. But things that I have read about talk about the benefits of that. I was listening to NPR the other day, and it talked about this new holistic approach to people that have long-term illnesses. And it it's not hospice, but it's just it's a group of doctors and nurses who go into people's homes who have these types of illnesses that are like ALS or something that's long-term, and just having somebody listen to them for 15 minutes has improved their life based on the study that they were doing. So it's such an important thing, because was it Robert Nichols that said we all need to be heard?
Mm-hmm.
We all want to be heard. So we really need to do that. Plus, do I include anything in my curriculum on why listening is important? It's important because if we want we do not have a true idea of what students' potential is in the classroom because they don't listen half the time. So it would be amazing to see what students really could do if they did know how to listen in the school environment, in the classroom environment. I hope that answered your question.
Well, I'm thinking more of kind of the relationship piece,
Oh,
that when
absolutely.
you listen, you're really making somebody other than yourself more important.
Exactly. And that's probably really hard for most people, because a lot of people want to talk. They just want to be the speaker. They don't want to be the listener, because a lot of times when you're talking, you go back to the things that they say. If there's something that, oh, wait, I know about this. This is, if it triggers something that's familiar to you, you quit listening because you just want to tell them what you're thinking, I know about that. And I catch myself doing that all the time. My husband says I'm not the best listener, and I'm still working on that. But it is hard, because that environment, being able to be respectful to each other and take turns listening is so important, because then you both get that feeling of feeling valued.
Thanks.
Who else is out there that wants to comment? Kay, your microphone appears to be muted.
Oh,
There you go.
no? Oh, here it is, down here.
Yep. You're good. We can hear you now. Oh, no, you just muted it again.
There we go. How's that?
That's perfect. We can hear you
Okay.
now.
Well, I keep coming across anecdotal stories about the value of silence, stillness, meditation, mindfulness in the classroom setting for young children. But are there any really studies on this, or what have you come across about that? Because
I am not
hear these
sure.
stories.
No, I am not sure, but I do. I have not read anything about that. I've spent a lot of time trying to look for studies and statistics that specifically deal with elementary school listening, and they're just not out there. So I'm not sure if there's any at that level. Laura, are there any at the college level?
Well, I can actually speak to the elementary level on this one. I know that Goldie Hawn, who is an actress, she actually implemented a meditation program in the elementary schools. And I know that she published a book. I don't know if they did. I'm assuming that they did an actual research study, but I can't confirm nor deny that. But I know that she has a book out about teaching meditation and mindfulness. I can't remember exactly which term she used at the elementary level, and just the improvements that have occurred because of that.
Yeah, because there's something called the silent minute or the stillness minute, and I keep reading these anecdotal stories about them. But I'd like to have some solid research on it to see what difference. Because from my perspective, silence is a prerequisite for listening. You have to be comfortable with silence in order to listen.
Well, my favorite thing to do when I do a presentation on this is put the letters of the word listen up on the board, jumbled up, and say, what other word can you make? And it's silent, because you have to be silent to listen.
Yeah. So thank you.
No, I would definitely look up the silent minute. I do know some teachers who have done research, not so much research, more articles on using yoga with children and that type of meditation, that it helps improve their ability in the classroom. So but I will look up silent minute. And what was the other one you called it?
Stillness. People, that seems to be a word that's more acceptable in many communities. Rather than say silence, you say stillness.
I would love to look more about that.
Donna, Phil has a question. He says, going back to an earlier point that Sheila brought up about screen time, Mary Turkle discusses this in her books Alone Together and Reclaiming Conversation. Phil, do you want to jump in and say anything about that?
Well, surely. I'm actually doing some work on that as well. But Sherry Turkle has done a lot of work on screen time and how it affects understanding, but also we can apply it to listening. She says the very presence of a phone, in a classroom actually creates a distraction, and so we can postulate this out to how does it affect listening.
Thank you, Phil. Jenny, I see that you've got, I think it's a question, I'm not sure. When monitoring students when they are listening in pairs, how do you support effective listening? And what, if anything, do you do if you see behaviors you want to discourage?
Okay, can you read that again? Because I was looking to see where it was and I didn't hear the whole question because.
Yeah, it says when monitoring students when they are listening in pairs, how do you support effective listening? And what, if anything, do you do if you see behaviors you want to discourage?
One of the first things I'll do is I will notice the ones who are doing well and try to ignore the behavior. Specifically like the groups next to them, like, oh, Johnny and Susie, look how well you guys listen to each other or something like that. What I might do is the next time that we stop to practice reading, I might have them model for everyone, the two that were not doing it correctly, model for everyone on how to do it correctly. So that then I can reinforce what they're doing. And then if they're not doing it again, I can remind them, oh, boys and girls, remember you just showed us this is how we're supposed to do it. Can you fix that now?
Love that modeling. That's fantastic.
Thanks, Jenny. And Dr. H says many children cannot listen because they are hungry.
We have to say, we have to fix those first basic needs. A lot of the schools that I work in now, if everyone goes to breakfast, even if they have already eaten at home, that's a huge impact. If they're hungry, if they slept in a car all night, these are things this is why it's so important to know your students and to know what their life is like. One of the things I teach all of my pre-service teachers is when they have their own classroom, is that first week of school to call the parents so that first contact with their parents is going to be a positive experience. Try to create that communication, that parent, so that when they do have to call about something that's probably not as a positive note, it gives them that relationship that they've already started building with that parent. Yes, children cannot listen because they're hungry. Yes, Samantha Roper was one of my former students. She had to make three positive parent contact calls during both of her field experiences to all the parents in her classroom.
Well, she put a smiley face after it, so it must have worked out well for her.
She wasn't very excited about it, but she does use it now. It really helps build all of these. Everything that we do with students is all about that relationship. So being able to communicate and listen to each other and have that conversation with those parents where you model good listening as well. So that's, it has to start with the teacher for sure.
Great.
What I find interesting is, and I'm applying this to some of the consulting work I do too, and Kay, this goes back to something that you had said, well, that people prefer the term stillness as opposed to silence. And I find that people get really turned off in a way about the term listening. But when I was thinking about using, cooperative learning strategies, particularly at the K through 12 level, they want anything that's going to be learning, that's going to help the student learn. So if we call them cooperative learning strategies as opposed to cooperative listening strategies, we could get a lot more interest in it. So it's just kind of the way we use the term.
Yeah, so it's not so much what we say, it's how we say it.
Yeah. Hey, I see you very much nodding there.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah.
What other questions do we have out there? Teresa, do you have a question for us?
I think I'm going to have to leave.
Okay. It was good to see you, Kay. It's
Thank
always
Thank
so nice
you.
coming.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's see how to get out of here.
Do you see the leave meeting at the bottom right of your screen? It should be in red.
Laura, I think since you asked about cooperative learning strategies, and Donna, I want to thank you to begin with. Learning about how we teach listening at the elementary level certainly extends right up here to the college level. I've used cooperative learning strategies for over a decade, and they work very, very well. But when we get to listening, it's a little bit of a stretch for students, and that goes back, I think, to something that Laura, you said, and I believe Kay did as well, that just the term listen creates a little bit of discomfort sometimes.
I think part of that is because they've been told to listen for so long that word is just becomes a turnoff. It becomes like a trigger phrase. Okay, boys and girls, time to listen. Well, no, really, it's time to listen all day long. This is not just the only time you want me to listen. So I think we've used it.
Yeah, we definitely become their mother or their father when we use that in the classroom, don't we?
Yes.
Donna, are you familiar with Kagan's, it's one of his cooperative learning techniques he uses, and I've adapted them, and I think, Laura, I sent them to you. He used talking chips.
Oh, yes, I love those.
And then I also made listening chips, you know, I hear you chips, and then he also used response chips. So, you know, if you wanted a certain kind of response, if you wanted the kids to come up with a certain kind of response, but I've used those with adults and in business to train them to, you know, take turns listening and you know, have them spend their talking chips. And then when they see that, you know, they're spending too many talking chips, or
oh, that's a great idea.
And then they have to spend the I hear you chips and paraphrase, or just, you know, make sure that the other person knows that they've listened to them. But it even kind of affected their behavior after that, because, you know, in meetings later, people would say things like, oh, you know, somebody's spending too many talking chips, or, you know, we haven't heard from some people. Or another one I used was what I call the thumbs up chip, you know, what's right with that chip, because people have a tendency to tell you everything that's wrong with what you just said. And so I had them start with, you know, what was right with it. But Kagan has a lot of, both of them, Kagan and Kagan, had a lot of techniques that I think adapt well to teaching listening. So kudos to you for using them at the elementary level.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I did use when I first started working with the student to do this is the teachers were saying, you know, such and such is just not listening. And one of the teachers said, I just decided to give them each a popsicle stick. And so when it was their turn to listen, they had a popsicle stick. So they knew holding that stick, they didn't get to talk. And then they would switch with the other person when they switched roles. So yeah, like talking sticks and talking chips, those are great. I have not used those, but I really want to investigate more of those, because I have a lot of my own students now that would definitely use talking chips in the first 5 minutes of class.
Yeah, Sheila, I use those talking chips every semester, so I'm so grateful that you turned me onto them and sent me your extra stash of them, so I didn't have to cut them out myself.
Awesome.
Dick, anything you would like to add?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
Before we sign off, I had a thought about a couple of books I'd like to recommend. Donna, I was listening to the questions around intact content. You know, how do you not make the listening process disruptive to the content? And there's a book called Different Like Me, my book of autism heroes, where each page is a picture and a short description of a person throughout history who possibly was autistic, given what we know of them historically. They're very short content pieces, but they have a beginning, middle, and end. And I'm sure that there are other, versions of short story shortness that might lend itself to between each pair. They can switch off. The other book I wanted to suggest, which I find from a listening perspective is wonderful, and I use with adults, although it is clearly a children's book, is called Bullfrog Pops, and it's a scholastic book.
I love that book.
Yeah, all right. So basically, for those who maybe not have seen it, as you end each second page, it primes a mindset of what the next content is supposed to be, and then the following page dispels that and takes it in a different direction. And so again, it might be an opportunity to have a pause, like an appropriate pause for what do you think is coming next as the priming question for the listening, and then, let it play out for the next kid and then have their turn be the second response. I think they're fun.
There's one that I would suggest, there's two books actually. One called that you might want to get to do the same type of thing is, one is called That's Good, That's Bad. So what it does is it says, oh, this is good. This little boy got to fly to Atlanta or whatever. I can't remember where he goes. And then it's, oh, that's bad. The airplane crashed. Oh, it's good. He was saved by this. Oh, that's bad. This is a snake, So it goes through the whole thing like that. So again, you have those stopping points where you can make predictions. And the other one that's very similar is called Fortunately, Unfortunately.
I love that, Donna, because that also allows us to bring in the element of evaluative listening to the conversation and broaden the scope from not just interpretation, but adding judgment. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're welcome. Thank you for those books. I can't pick one up.
Jenny, that's really good. And Jenny, when you were talking before about putting photos around the room, what it took me back to is I attended the National Communication Association conference a few weeks ago, and I went to one of the great ideas for teaching speech sessions. And what I didn't know existed on the internet, although I should have known because everything is on the internet, right? But if you've ever watched The Big Bang Theory, in the beginning, they have all of those photos that go by in seconds. Somebody has downloaded every single one of those photos and titled them.
That's awesome.
And so what a great thing to be able to put around the room culturally, for people who understand the Big Bang Theory, and the activity that they used actually was researching what that photo is of, because they tie back historically to something, and then giving a quick speech on that.
Fascinating.
Yeah. I see another comment from Samantha. She says, so many good ideas and things I can take back to my classroom. Thank you for doing this. We like that.
Yes. Samantha, I hope you're coming to the next, not Samantha, Donna, I hope you're coming to the next ILA convention and presenting, because we haven't had many sessions from elementary teachers. And
actually, I did send a proposal in with a secondary English teacher from Radford University about doing this same thing, using adolescent literature with pre-service secondary teachers.
Okay.
And Donna, the whole body listening was created by audiologists, did you say?
Yes. Well, they were both speech pathologists.
Speech pathologists. So that, when you said that, what I looked at was, well, yes, because that would be the way of keeping involved in a conversation physically.
Right.
So you're part of the group. So
exactly.
It would be interesting to then say the next step to that would be whole mind listening. So
yes.
What would a whole mind listening chart look like?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and actually I reached out to the author, and we're going to have a Zoom conversation next week, because I wanted to talk to her about how I used it and what other things that she has been doing with it, because she does do presentations on it a lot. So.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah, so I'm very excited about that.
Well, let her know that proposals have been extended for the ILA conference.
Till when?
I think is it the end of November? Somebody help me.
30th.
The 30th of November?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's Friday.
Yeah, that's Friday. So next week might not work, but let her know that she's got 3 more days.
Okay, I will tell her. That's awesome. Very good. Thank you.
Other questions or comments from people?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank everyone for coming. This has been wonderful. I can't believe how many takeaways, Donna, I got that I'm going to be able to use in my
Yeah.
classroom and in consulting, so I very much appreciate that.
Yes,
Thank you.
wonderfully pragmatic with some good theoretical grounding. I love the blend.
Thank you. Thank you. I tried to make the study, I had a lot of resistance at the beginning because, you know, there's no time to add anything else to the curriculum. So I had to find ways to embed it that wouldn't require extra work for the teachers.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And Donna, could you once again give us your email address so if people want to email you for the PowerPoint, they can do that?
Sure. It's Donna, D-O-N-N-A. Folgelsong is all one word. So it's Donna, D-O-N-N-A, F-O-G-E-L-S-O-N-G at vt.edu. So it's vt.edu.
So Donna Folgelsong at vt.edu.
Yeah.
Perfect. And if you can't figure that out, you can send a message to ILA and they should be able to direct you to the right place.
Yes.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Donna. This has been wonderful. Juliana says, thank you, Donna. Big exclamation point.
Awesome.
So the fact that you have affected people around the world, isn't that what this is all about?
Gives me chill bumps. I'm so excited. I love to talk to people about listening.
Yeah, we all do, I think.
Yes, yes. Come on, think about what you're doing, right? Think about what you're doing.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you all.
And you can leave by pressing that leave meeting at the bottom right of your screen. It should be, it's in red on mine. I'm not sure if it's on yours in red.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.